Samantha was a young woman of 19, full of fire and restless energy, whose very presence seemed to challenge the boundaries the world had drawn for her. She lived under the watchful eyes of her father, Edward, a man whose love was as deep as it was strict. Edward had always been protective, sometimes to the point of being overbearing, and while his intentions were rooted in care, Samantha often felt trapped by the invisible chains of his authority. Each day seemed to stretch longer than the last, with rules and restrictions at every turn. The mansion she lived in was luxurious, yet she felt imprisoned within its walls. The golden chandeliers and opulent furnishings could not soothe the yearning for independence that pulsed through her veins. Her rebellious streak had always been present, manifesting in little ways, a sharp retort here, a secret outing there, but it was during a late afternoon in early spring that it reached a boiling point. Samantha walked into Carter Son's jewelry store, her heart beating with a mix of thrill and fear. She scanned the glittering display cases as if she were merely admiring the craftsmanship, yet the adrenaline coursing through her veins told another story. Her eyes fell upon the delicate diamond necklace, its chain glinting under the store lights. Without thinking, almost instinctively, she slid it into the pocket of her jacket. It was a reckless act, a spark of defiance against a world that felt stifling. Before she could make her escape, a firm hand gripped her wrist, halting her in her tracks. The security guard's gaze was sharp, unwavering, and the murmurs of the other customers felt like thunder in her ears. Samantha's cheeks flushed with a mix of embarrassment and indignation, her heart pounding wildly. Moments later, Edward appeared, his presence commanding immediate attention. Tall, broad-shouldered, and always exuding an air of authority, he walked straight to the counter, handled the situation swiftly, and turned his attention to his daughter. Without a word, he took her by the arm, guiding her out of the store and into the cold spring air. The tension that awaited at home was palpable. In the grand dining room, Edward's voice boomed, shaking the walls. "Do you understand what you've done, Samantha?" he demanded. "Do you want to throw away everything I've worked for, everything we've built?" Samantha's response was instantaneous, fiery, and unyielding. "Everything you've built? You mean the cage you've made for me? I'm not your prisoner." Her words echoed in the room, heavy with years of suppressed frustration. Edward's stern expression faltered for only a moment before returning with the intensity of a man accustomed to control. He slammed his hand onto the table. "This isn't about control. It's about your safety. You are blind to the dangers of the world, to the people who would take advantage of you." Tears threatened to spill from Samantha's eyes, but she refused them. "You call it protection. I call it imprisonment. I'm suffocating under your rules. I need to live my life, Dad, on my own terms." The words were raw, an honest confession of her longing, yet they cut deep into Edward's heart. His love was a constant presence, though expressed in strictness and unwavering vigilance. He had always believed that his protective measures were a shield, a necessary armor to keep his daughter from harm, but Samantha could only see the barriers that isolated her from the world. Days turned into a tense standoff. Edward's protective measures escalated. Guards patrolled the mansion, keys to the car were kept under lock, and Samantha's outings were tightly monitored. The mansion, despite its grandeur, felt like a prison. Samantha's bedroom, once a haven, now felt like a cage. She would spend hours at the window, watching the neighboring children play, hearing the distant laughter and splashes of a pool party she was forbidden to attend. A sense of isolation settled over her like a heavy fog. She whispered to herself, "I just want to live. Just once." One evening, driven by a mix of desperation and courage, Samantha made her move. She slipped out through the back gate, her pulse quickening as the cool night air kissed her cheeks. Freedom, however fleeting, was intoxicating. She made her way to a small gathering by the river, where music and laughter mingled with the scent of blooming flowers. For the first time in days, she felt alive. The music thrummed through her veins, the laughter of friends filling the emptiness she had been carrying inside her. She danced, carefree, and for a brief, shining moment, the weight of her father's rules, his fears, and her own anxieties lifted. But the euphoria was short-lived. A black SUV screeched to a halt nearby, and before Samantha could react, two masked men lunged at her. Hands gripping her arms, they forced her into the vehicle. Screams tore from her throat as her friends fled, leaving her alone in the chaos. Panic surged like wildfire through her veins. She had sought freedom, yet in that instant, she realized how fragile and dangerous it could be. When she awoke, the world was a blur of shadows and cold concrete. Her hands were bound, and she sat in a dimly lit warehouse. The voices of the kidnappers were low and menacing. "The girl's worth something," one said. "Her father will pay," replied the other. Samantha trembled, the full weight of her father's warning settling upon her shoulders. Fear gripped her like an unrelenting vice, yet amidst it all, a flicker of clarity emerged. Her rebellion, her defiance, had almost cost her everything. Hours dragged on until a sudden commotion shattered the oppressive silence. The door burst open, and a stranger, a tall young man with rugged features and kind eyes, rushed inside. His presence was commanding yet gentle. "Don't be scared. I'll get you out," he said firmly. Samantha's chest heaved as he cut the ropes and guided her through a broken side door. Gunshots rang out in the distance, but he shielded her, moving with precision and care. For the first time, Samantha felt a sense of safety, not because of rules, guards, or authority, but because of trust, genuine and unwavering. The stranger, whose name she learned was Daniel, led her to a small, secluded cabin outside the city. He offered her water, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and spoke softly, explaining that freedom was not merely about escaping control, but about understanding whom to trust and how to navigate the dangers of the world with wisdom. Samantha listened, her defiance softening, replaced by reflection. She admitted to herself that she had thought rebellion was strength, yet it had left her exposed, vulnerable, and alone. Edward arrived at the cabin later, accompanied by the police. Relief washed over his features as he saw his daughter safe. Yet, instead of scolding, he pulled her into his arms, his voice breaking as he whispered, "You could have been taken from me forever. Do you understand what that would have done to me?" Samantha clung to him, tears flowing freely, realizing at last that his strictness had always been rooted in love, not a desire to control. She apologized, acknowledging that she had mistaken his protection for imprisonment. Edward embraced her tightly, promising that he would strive to give her more trust, but reminding her that freedom carried responsibility. It was a delicate balance, love, guidance, and trust all intertwined, each necessary for the other. Weeks later, sunlight poured into Samantha's room, illuminating the familiar surroundings with a new warmth. The diamond necklace she had once stolen rested on her desk, a symbol not of shame, but of growth, reflection, and the journey she had endured. She placed it around her neck, gazing into the mirror. The reflection staring back at her was not that of a rebellious girl, but a young woman who had confronted danger, discovered the meaning of love, and learned that true freedom was inseparable from trust, responsibility, and connection. She had discovered that the walls she had fought against were not constructed to trap her, but to protect her, and when love replaced fear, freedom revealed its truest form. Samantha's days gradually began to change, though the mansion still held its familiar elegance and quiet corridors. The difference was subtle at first, a softness in her father's gaze, a pause before issuing orders, and a willingness to listen to her thoughts and feelings. Edward had realized that his iron grip, though born from love, could not replace understanding, and Samantha had begun to understand that rules, when paired with trust, could feel less like chains and more like guidance. She started venturing into the garden in the early mornings, letting sunlight warm her face, breathing in the scent of jasmine and roses that climbed along the walls. Each breath seemed lighter, freer, as if the weight of past mistakes and fear were slowly lifting. One afternoon, Samantha found herself standing before the large bay windows that overlooked the family estate. The sun cast a golden glow over the manicured lawns, and for the first time, she noticed the beauty of the place she had once resented. The sparkling fountain in the center of the garden, the gentle sway of the tall oak trees, and the distant mountains forming a blue silhouette against the sky, all of it seemed to whisper a message she hadn't heard before. Freedom did not mean chaos or danger, but the ability to see the world clearly and make choices with awareness. She smiled faintly, feeling a warmth in her chest she hadn't allowed herself in years. Daniel's presence, though temporary, had left a lasting impression. He had become more than a savior in that terrifying moment. He had shown her that safety and trust could coexist with independence. The cabin by the river, the quiet conversations late into the night, and the careful guidance he had offered had taught Samantha a lesson far more valuable than rebellion could provide, that vulnerability could be strength, and connection could be empowering. She recalled how his steady hands had untangled her ropes and how his calm voice had reassured her, and she realized that these gestures of care, simple as they seemed, were more protective than any rule or lock ever could be. Edward, too, began to change, though he would never admit it outright. He allowed Samantha to step outside without immediate supervision, gradually giving her small freedoms while observing from a distance. At first, she tested these boundaries, feeling a thrill as she walked along the stone paths of the estate, each step a declaration of independence. But soon, she realized that the safety net her father had woven for her had not disappeared, it had simply transformed into trust, and that realization brought a comfort she had never known. She was learning a delicate balance between freedom and responsibility, independence and care, a lesson that no thrill or rebellion could teach her as effectively as experience had. Evenings were no longer filled with fear or tension but with conversation. Samantha would sit at the kitchen table with her father, sharing her thoughts on books she had read, music she loved, and dreams she had long kept secret. Edward listened, often quietly, nodding, sometimes offering advice, sometimes simply acknowledging her words. These moments, ordinary yet profound, became the new pillars of their relationship. Each conversation, each shared laugh, each gentle disagreement strengthened the bond between them, creating a bridge built not on control, but on understanding and love. Samantha also began to reconnect with her friends, cautiously at first. Her outings were no longer acts of defiance but choices made with mindfulness and consideration. She attended small gatherings, strolled through nearby parks, and visited art exhibitions, experiencing the world not as a battlefield where she had to prove her independence, but as a landscape where she could belong, explore, and grow. The lessons from her near-tragic encounter with danger stayed with her, a silent reminder that freedom without awareness could be perilous, but freedom with responsibility could be exhilarating and life-affirming. One rainy afternoon, Samantha stood at the edge of the estate's small pond, watching the ripples form as raindrops fell, each circle expanding and intersecting with another. She thought of her journey, of rebellion, fear, vulnerability, and finally understanding. Her chest swelled with gratitude for the people who had guided her, protected her, and shown her love in moments of need. Edward's steadfast care, Daniel's unexpected intervention, even the stern lessons learned through fear and risk, they all formed the mosaic of her growth. She realized that independence was not the absence of guidance, but the confident choice to move forward with lessons learned and love in her heart. In the quiet of the night, Samantha sometimes found herself thinking of that spring evening when she first sought freedom outside the mansion's gates, of the dark warehouse, and of the stranger who had shown her courage and trust. Those memories no longer terrified her, instead, they were threads of wisdom woven into the fabric of her being. She understood now that life's dangers were real, but so too was the strength derived from connection, love, and self-awareness. Fear had once dictated her actions, but now, reflection and understanding guided her steps.